This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a rating or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. Well, my guest today, motion picture and television production designer and art director Vincent Jeffords, was born in New York City, but grew up mainly in Los Angeles, where his father was an executive for the Walt Disney Company and his mother was a model with the Eileen Ford Agency. As a kid, Vincent always created drawings, objects, and dioramas. He also spent time making Super 8 movies with friends. While in high school, Vincent developed a talent for sculpting realistic character heads in clay, from which he created plaster molds and rubber Halloween masks, which he sold to local stores. While attending UCLA, where he earned a bachelor's degree in fine arts with an emphasis on sculpture, Vincent was also spending time art directing movies for graduate students in the Department of Theater, Film, and Television. After school, Vincent focused on sculpture, which he would go on to exhibit in one-man shows in LA, New York, London, and in various group shows. At that time, he also art directed short films at the American Film Institute. Then a big door opened when Keith Greco and Vincent designed and built the Red Knight costume for Terry Gilliam's movie The Fisher King. That led to work on commercials and his first independent feature film, Motorama, a quirky movie that ran on the Sundance Channel for years. More small films led to Movies of the Week for network TV, commercials, and landing his first TV pilot, Relativity, for Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz, which ran for 3 seasons. Vincent became the production designer for the original TV series Roswell and the NBC miniseries The 60s, both of which were nominated by the Art Directors Guild for Outstanding Design. Nearly 15 years ago, Vincent was brought onto a brand new show called Criminal Minds. 325 episodes later, he's still on the show, which has been syndicated in 66 countries around the world. Criminal Minds is in the top 20 all-time longest-running scripted episodic dramas, up there with Bonanza and The Simpsons. Vincent is currently at work on the final episode of the entire series, and so it is a great privilege to welcome the exceptionally talented Vincent Jeffords to StoryBeat. Vincent, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So you've been an artist all of your life, and it seems from your bio that you kind of fell into production and design. How did that happen? How did it start?
Well, when I was, here's the thing. When I was at UCLA, they didn't have any kind of program for production design.
Right.
So when the students got to doing their graduate films, they needed someone to help them, and it was just a natural thing to come over to the art department.
Of course.
See if someone would come and help, and later, so I got pulled into it there, and then later I was the guy, because I lived in a warehouse in East LA, and I had a shop, and I had all my tools and my paint, and I knew how to build things, and I had a truck. So people were always coming to me, asking me to help out with stuff.
And I'm guessing you were
that's how I got drawn into it.
I'm guessing you were kind of cheap to hire at that time.
I was very cheap to hire.
And that made you very attractive.
Gas and food.
Gas and food.
And some fun.
But you made your bones. You learned a lot about doing that at that time, I assume.
I did, and at that time it was, I was interested in a lot of things. I was primarily interested in sculpture, but I was making furniture designs, and I was interested in film. I'd always been interested in film, and so it just began to pull me, the opportunities in that way.
So had you always been a fan of the movies and TV?
Absolutely. My father, as you mentioned, was a Disney exec, and when he got moved out to the studio, Burbank studio, we were moved to Los Angeles in '61, and one of the privileges of being a studio exec is that you could borrow 16 millimeter films, and we had a 16 millimeter film projector in our basement, and my dad would bring every weekend, like Cinema Paradiso.
Wow.
You would bring home 16 millimeter films. I ended up seeing the entire library. I mean, we ran through all the popular films, and then we got deeper into the Disney library, the educational films and
Right.
odd films, and we watched everything.
Did you all the TV shows, Wonderful World of Disney too, all that stuff?
They did not have at that time. None of the TV shows were available in 16 millimeter, unless they were like, there were some films that like Davy Crockett that Disney made that they aired on Wonderful World of Color,
Mm-hmm.
the Disney show, and also had theatrical releases.
So
There's a ton of material, shorts and all kinds of things that most people never see.
Oh, I'm imagining that library of unseen films is probably quite substantial. So when you were watching movies and TV back then, were you looking at the designs? Were you paying attention to that then?
I don't. I just think I think you just get. There's certain films that just 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
It's incredible.
Or Pinocchio or Dumbo. The sequences. I mean, these films were just. So even films that are kind of forgotten now, like Swiss Family Robinson, that absolutely captured a kid's imagination. The idea of taking a boat, dismantled, wrecked boat, and taking all the parts of it and building a gigantic tree house with mechanisms to carry water up and down. And,
right.
I mean, it was just, that kind of stuff just, kind of stuff that's just kind of indelible when you're a kid.
Well, obviously you were fascinated by it. So, what was it about production design ultimately that drew you to it when you were in school?
Well, what I really liked about, here's the thing. I always made the distinction between, a piece of sculpture and a piece of design for film. It really has to do with the read time. Like a piece of sculpture, you go back to over and over again. You stand in front of it, you look at it, you touch it. If you're allowed, and you absorb it in a different way. Film reads, the image reads by, and it has to read for the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And but there's such a variety of things you get to make. You're presented with a problem, and it's very fun if you like to problem solve. That someone presents you with a design problem, and then you get to respond with your thoughts about how to solve that problem.
Right.
And the other thing that appealed to me about production design was the speed at which you got to see the things realized. It's like when you design something for a commercial or a TV show or a movie, it's once the decision's made and the thing is going ahead, it has to get made.
Sure.
It has to be finished. So there's this. It's very satisfying to see the designs realized.
You obviously can't spend a whole lot of time on them. I mean, it's clearly true. Even on a big budget movie, you can't spend a lot of time on it.
No, you get your time, and then once the thing is happening, it has to happen. It has to be ready. This is why people, when you're making, it's often hard to go to outside vendors who aren't in the film business. And you say, well, I need this thing constructed, or I need this part, or I need this thing made, I need this glass slumped to a certain shape. And, they'll say, oh, we had a little problem, and we can't get it to you on Tuesday, but it'll be ready by... No. You say, no, that there is no Wednesday. It has to be ready Tuesday.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people don't get that. People working in the film industry get that. It has to be delivered.
Well, that's a big moving train that you're on. It's got to be there. So I'm curious, in your bio, we talked about Halloween masks, because you made Halloween masks. Has that experience of doing that back then, has that had an impact on work you do today?
Well, in a way it did, because, at that time, I had friends we were very interested in makeup effects.
Mm-hmm.
We're big fans of people like Dick Smith, and later like Rick Baker, and I was, of course, the other half of that was, because, again, working for Disney, I used to go with my dad, and I got to go to what used to be called WED Enterprises.
Oh, yes, I've worked for WED.
You worked for WED.
I worked for WED on
I used to go over there.
Epcot Center.
Yeah. Yeah. So I used to be able to go over there with my dad every once in a while, and I met Blaine Gibson.
Oh, sure.
I don't know if
Yeah.
Right. So I got to meet Blaine Gibson several times, and I mean, he was just this master sculptor.
Absolutely.
And so part of, seeing him with all the sculpted heads and all the character heads and everything he did for Pirates of the Caribbean and all the presidents, and when he did a portrait, it was perfect,
Did you get to go over to Mapo and see the working animatronics?
I did, a couple of times. Yeah.
People don't just for the listeners' understanding. WED Enterprises stood for Walter Elias Disney Enterprises, and they were the theme park design arm. And next door was Mapo, which was short for Mary Poppins, and that's where they built everything.
Right. So all of the armatures and the lucite, they do all that the lucite
bodies,
basically skins.
Yeah.
For all of the audio animatronic figures
Right.
at that time.
Exactly.
And I noticed it's funny, and I'm a fan of Westworld, the show Westworld.
Oh, it's great.
And there's a flashback sequence in that I was rewatching recently when the creator of the park is talking about when they first started 35 years ago, and there were these little clips of basically exactly the way Disney makes their audio animatronics. There was kind of there's a mechanical armature, a lucite skin, and then they skin that over with the silicon,
right?
A silicon skin, realistic silicon skin over that, and you see them sleeving all that stuff. It's just a quick cut, and it's funny. I said, yeah, well, that's straight out of Mapo.
It is, yeah, that would be straight out of Mapo. It was very interesting to see that in the works and how it worked, because it's just it's out of sci-fi, even though it was right in front of you. And I found that very fascinating. Are there production designers back then or even today who you admire, who you think, wow, that's someone to aspire toward?
Oh, absolutely. Just staying on the Disney end of things, Peter Ellenshaw.
Oh,
at
definitely.
Disney. All the work, all the early Bond films,
Ken Adam.
So beautifully. Ken Adam. Yeah, beautiful design.
Incredible design.
Yeah, and
he also did Dr. Strangelove, and I'm pretty sure.
Oh yes, and his style was. He also did all the way up to the Addams Family movies. He was just impeccable work. So that whole world had a big influence on me.
Did you actually? I'm assuming you didn't go to school to learn this, or did you? Did you go to school?
No. What happened was I had my studio in East LA. I was sculpting, I was exhibiting, and I had friends in the film business. And at one point, I got pulled into commercials. I had a friend who was doing work for. It was the same artist who got me. He originally approached me to work on the Red Knight costume with Terry Gilliam. It was Keith Greco. He'd been working with a director and Peter Lang, and then I started working with Peter Lang, and that was my, the first time I got to start spending, having a real budget to do stuff. Because back in those days, they did a lot of car commercials, and in those days, car commercials involved a lot of construction. It was often you were building an entire sound stage full of stuff to put cars in. Which is all completely changed now. But back then, you'd create an environment and with a theme often, and then the cars would be in that, and there'd be a little story that went with that. And so, did a lot of that. Was my first kind of opportunity to work on a bigger scale, So, even though I wasn't trained in production design, I kind of came out of that world. And my background in art just lent itself.
Well,
plus, I had a background in construction. I mean, a sense of how things are made.
Well, I think
which helps a lot when you're communicating.
I would think that does help a lot because you're building constantly and you're telling people how things need to be built.
Yeah, there's a language to that. How to realize stuff.
Sure. Sure. So you learned it by doing it. You didn't get a degree in it. And would you say that was a positive for you, or do you think it would have been better if you'd had some training in it? Or was it better
Well,
the way you did it?
interesting. This is a very good question because I'm realizing now I'm actually involved with my, I'm an art director. I belong to the Art Directors Guild.
Sure.
You know that the title production designer is actually it's almost an honorific. It didn't exist before the 1960s. It was just art directors. Art directors were the art. If you look at older films, the credit is always an art director. Production design is a credit that evolved, and but there are no production designers in our contracts. It's art directors and assistant art directors. And so now I'm actually more involved in my guild at this point. I'm actually on the council, and I realized that it was a two-edged sword. I never did any other job except the production design job. In other words, the projects started off very small, very tiny, but I was always doing the top job, and I always continued to do that job. And I just kept leapfrogging from project to project and bigger things and so on.
Right.
The advantage of that was I was already at the top of my of my profession in that sense. I'd already become a production designer. Most people don't do it like that.
No.
They work for other people. They are assistants, and they become art directors, and then they get their break, and they move up, and maybe they have to wait quite a while learning their craft, and then they move up. I didn't have the benefit of having mentors. I mean, I had a couple of mentors. Paul Eads is a very good television production designer, terrific, and he had hired me to do sculpting for him. And when I first got my first break, I went to him with my designs and said, "Here are my floor plan. Here are my designs for my first, TV show. Could you please look them over and tell me if I'm making any terrible mistakes?" And he looked them over and made some suggestions. And so I had a couple of people that helped me, but I never had the benefit of having all that umbrella of knowledge about how to do stuff, and also how the structure of a film works. The art department is one cog. You got to know how all the other departments work.
Sure.
And you have to know how to communicate with them. And I had to learn that the hard way.
And you're all pulling toward the same result. That end thing, whatever
but
that
I didn't
end
know
thing
that there was a lot I didn't know, and I had to kind of reinvent the wheel, which made, all the mistakes I made were not design mistakes in my career. Mistakes I made were always not understanding how the
business worked,
the politics or the communication issues worked.
Sure. You said before floor plans? I'm curious. Were you already knowledgeable about drafting and all that prior to starting?
No, I just knew how to draw.
So when did you learn how to draft, which is a little different skill set?
I never learned to draft. I always had hired people to draft.
Very
so
nice.
I did all and I still do. I do, but I've drawn so many sets that I visualize them so in my mind so clearly, and I can draw them. Actually, I can also draw them in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I do rough sketches. I dimension them out just by rough dimensional attributions, rough scale drawings, and I'll do several views plus a floor plan, and then I've got this terrific, set designer who can look at my drawings and just whip them out, and then we talk about stuff and details, and I'll go over it with my art director, and so. So
what you have is the gift of a great eye.
Yeah, I do have a good, when you've drawn enough sets. I mean, we counted, we've done this. Criminal Minds has been on for, we're on our 325th episode.
Goodness.
Yeah. I mean, and so we finish a week from Monday, and that's it. Finale, end of show.
Mm.
And we added up all the sets we've done on that show, and it was 8,267.
Wow.
Sets.
Wow.
About 2/3 of those were builds on stage.
Wow. That's gigantic.
So, it's staggering.
That is staggering.
I was staggered.
How much?
It included, we added up, I think we did 307 police stations, quote-unquote police stations. They were either police stations, FBI field offices, sheriff stations, ranger stations, some kind of cop shop set.
How many of those were redressed from something else?
We always reuse sets. on a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually the beauty of it. You build a set for one purpose. Then if you don't have to tear it down for reasons of space, and we had 2 big sound stages, you repurpose constantly.
And that's
one thing I learned on Criminal Minds: you can turn anything into a morgue. Almost anything. And actually, the fun thing about repurposing sets is that it takes you to very unexpected places. Like, if you have to take an existing space and then repurpose it, you'll find yourself being forced to make solutions that you never would have thought of.
Such as?
Well, let's say the layout wouldn't be typical. So you cut out a wall and you create an opening, or the windows weren't so you change the windows into something else, and then the floor pan, and you end up with what ends up as unexpected solutions make things feel very real. They don't seem pat. It's not like everything where you'd expect it.
I find that fascinating.
It can be, it can be liberating, actually.
I've now watched. I don't know if you've seen it, but the Grand Budapest Hotel. Have you ever seen that?
I know.
Okay.
What a confection
really.
That whole movie is.
I've now seen that movie, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 times. And more that I see it, the more I see how much redressing of the same set they have in that thing over and over again. It's astonishing.
You spot it.
Yeah, you start to see it after a while. You go, wait a minute, that's the same set from that other scene. but, totally repainted, totally with different everything, and yet it's the same set. It's very interesting. And I'm assuming that's what you guys have done over and over for years.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the things we actually did on that show, we knew we were going to have to do different, what kept my interest in doing Criminal Minds for 15 years is that, unlike other shows, it doesn't have permanent sets. Basically, you have this big BAU, which is a behavioral analysis unit at Quantico in Virginia. Then you have a jet, and basically those are places where they work through exposition. They set up the story, and then they're always going somewhere. So they continue the exposition on the jet, and then they get somewhere.
Right.
And then you have to build the world that they arrive at, because it's a different city. So. We just did and of course, we built a lot of stuff. Plus, there's always the bad guy, and the bad guy usually is a creep, and he's usually got some creepy environment.
Right.
So you build some kind of interesting, dark, creepy space that the guy, is doing
his nefarious thing.
His nefarious activities, and so every kind of subterranean space.
And
every kind of creepy attic.
And how much on location did you do?
Quite a lot, because there's they're on the move, so you do a lot of dressing of exteriors of locations. You're adding a lot of greens and walls and aging things or covering things or a lot of signage.
And are you on location with everything?
I'm on location. I remember, as you said, it's like a train. The art department is laying track. 5 miles out.
Mm-hmm.
And the train is coming all the time. Never on a TV show, they never stop shooting. You just shoot and shoot and shoot. So the train is always moving. You're laying track ahead of it. So by the time they get to a location, I would show up, or my art director would show up to open set and make sure that everything's okay. But basically, our work is done, and we're prepping by that time. So I'm almost never on set while they're shooting.
And what happens? What happens if there's an issue that needs to be addressed? Do they call you, or does somebody else do it?
No, they call us. But we have you have an on-set dresser. If you have a good relationship with the assistant directors, they're the ones that are going to anticipate problems and communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So very rarely were there big, problems of omission. Every once in a while, there's something. Hey, weren't we supposed to have a railing here? Something. Every once in a while, something falls through the cracks.
Sure, of course.
But often it would be something where they think of something at the last minute and wonder if we can, basically pull it out of the hat.
All right, so let's talk about the process of a television episode. Once you have a script, or it's something brand new or the new season or whatever, where do you start? What, aside from reading the script,
Okay.
which is obvious, where do you begin?
Usually it starts with, on this show, which is a very well-produced show, there's different, it varies hugely from show to show. But we would have an outline before we had a script.
Okay.
And the outline would indicate locations and sets. And we would have a discussion with the producer. On a TV show, you have your line producer, and you also usually have a producing director.
Right.
The producing director usually not only directs, several episodes, anywhere from 3 or 4 or 5 episodes, but also supervises other directors who are coming on board. Works with them.
More freelance.
With them.
More of the freelance directors.
So I sit down. In my case, it was Glenn Kershaw and Harry Bring, and we would look through that and the location manager. We had two location managers. One, they would alternate because they had to follow through on the show that they had prepped. And we start talking about it. Okay, it's Louisiana. And usually you go straight to the thing that's the most challenging. We have a big explosion. We have to do a bayou scene. Where in the hell are we going to do a bayou in Los Angeles County?
Where do you do bayous in Los Angeles County?
Well, interestingly, depending on time of year, there is one movie ranch called Polsa Rosa, and in the spring when the water is coming through their wash, they have a wash that's quite wide and full of trees, including a lot of small trees, and they allow you to sandbag that. And so we did a couple of times. We were able to go in with enough prep, and we would do sandbag the wash so that we could create 3 feet of water backed up.
Wow.
And one time we built a little, like a cabin in the bayou. They actually brought in an alligator. It was pretty fun.
You brought in a live alligator?
Yeah, for a foreground shot. So the alligator was in the foreground and kind of, dashed into the water. They had it penned off. It's pretty fun.
And I assume a wrangler.
And a wrangler. Although, this was early on. I think this was season 3. I don't think you'd do that today. If you wanted to put an alligator in, you'd just CG or alligator in. You wouldn't bother with all the trouble of transporting an animal.
Right. Right. Okay, so we got off track. You've got your script. You're talking to your producing director.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yep, that's okay.
All right, so what you do is you go down your list and you pick the toughest thing. There's a plane crash or if it's a big item or whatever, and then you start saying, well, what? And then because we're familiar with the town and we've been scouting it, and you have a location manager to help you, you start talking about, well, what where would the mansion be and how would this? And well, clearly we have to build the basement. Basements, bathrooms, and bedrooms. There's kind of a rule of thumb that you build those because you don't want to cram the whole company into a little tiny room to try and shoot scenes.
Right.
It just makes a lot more sense to build those on stage. So we'd immediately say, okay, I think we're building this, we're building that. Obviously, we're building the cop shop. Now let's go out and start scouting. So you would get, first thing would happen is location manager would email us all a bunch of photos. We would get the photos and weigh in. Then we'd set up scouts. Meanwhile, the show is shooting. You're doing all the other stuff that's happening at the same time. This is why, as a production designer, I have to have a good art director because he or she, in this case, he would be just keeping the wheels running. Then you could spend a lot of time in the van driving around L.A. County looking at stuff, and you either have the outline or hopefully by that time you have the script. And then what you really have to do is think like the director. The location doesn't. It has to serve that specific story, and if it. What you want to do for the director is not just say, "Oh, we found this beautiful house." You find the house with the balcony where you can get the sight line of the woman who's looking from the balcony down into the driveway that sees the car driving away. There are these little story points and sight lines.
Have you had that conversation with somebody ahead of time, or are you being intuitive about it?
No. You just look at the scripts and you talk to the producing director, and you say, "No, we need this, and we need to be able to run. You can't run from the kitchen to the door that gets to the basement, and then and then where would they exit? Okay, well they got it. There's a scene where they come out of the basement window, and they got to break the window and wonder, well, where are we going to put that? You try and anticipate all that stuff. Now, you're not going to tell the director how he or she is going to shoot it.
Right.
But especially on an episodic television show, you get very grateful directors if you can take them to a location and you've already thought out these things, and you present something that's a viable choice. And we'd always try and give them at least two good choices. And then if they were, rarely, if they, for some reason, those didn't work, you keep looking. But most of them would be delighted if you bring them a really good location that solves all their problems. They really want to get on with prepping the movie, the show.
Sure.
They want to get on with their casting and working on the script and talking to the writer, and they don't want to spend all their time in the van if they don't have to. So if you help solve their problems, you move the whole process forward. And that's what I felt like that was our job. Now in a movie, you've got a lot more time to prep. You're working. The director's on board. Episodic, remember, the director's coming in. They only have their their week of prep.
They come in late in the game.
Yeah, they got to hit the ground running. It's a little different.
And do you once you've got this notion as to what the various sets need to be in the script, do you then start to draw what your concepts are?
I do. And again, I try to draw. I draw based on what's needed, and in the story to try and tell the story visually, and then. But again, I don't want to dictate, entirely. But we also want to move. We have to move fast in terms of getting the stuff built because schedules change too. That's the other thing on a TV show. Actor availability and locations fall out, or there's a problem, and you got to be able to. We need this. We need the set on the second day of shooting instead of the seventh day of shooting. So the sooner you have your drawings all done and approved, the faster you can get going, give construction an opportunity to get ahead of the curve.
Do you build into your thinking this ability to punt or change quickly?
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. Part of the imperative of trying to get the design, you're not trying to shove the design down the director's throat. That's not the idea at all. You want the director and the DP involved. But you want to at least have the bones there to present so the conversation can start, And then if the director says, I really would be better for me if the door was over here because I want the guy to enter and I want them sitting, if the couch and the thing was here and I could see him coming, that would be better for me. Fine. Then let's redesign that floor plan and get that to work for your blocking.
Right.
But at least by then you have the rest of the space kind of laid out, and you have a proposal for the the socioeconomic level, the age of the interior, what's it made of, the color, maybe suggestions about the color scheme, based on the character. You could just conversation starters,
How much of your, or how should I say this, in your design choices, how much are you thinking about the ability of the set to help tell the story?
It's entirely about that. It's funny when you first start out, you think, oh, I get to do a saloon. I want to do that, that stamped tin ceiling, or I want to put a mural. It would be so great to have a mural. And, you realize, the director will come in and say, hey, listen, I don't have any reason to see the ceiling here. I don't have anybody lying on the floor looking up, dying from a gunshot wound or anything. I'm not going to see that. What I really care about is I really want to see these windows, So you really have to, and because I have to know that the parade went by or whatever.
So all of production design and art direction has to do with servicing the story.
Yes, that's the difference between that and architecture.
Yep. Okay,
the
good.
architect creates a space that you wander around in and experience.
I raised that question. I raised that question only because I know there are plenty of people out there who want to be designers who may not be thinking that way. That really, you're servicing the story.
Yes.
You're part of telling the story.
Yes. And you really have to think of it that way, because it's just going to live for that, and you also, depending on the medium, you want to. A lot of this is you want to put texture and light behind people, too.
Sure.
Because it's about the people, it's about the actors the characters, and so you're creating a place to put them, and you also have limited resources, so you begin to learn like what's going to get seen. You talk to the DP or you talk to the director about what they're going to, how they want to shoot it, and and then you try and put your energy into what's going to be seen.
Are a lot of the sets that you build only partial?
Not so much as you would think. There's always that thing like, oh, well, we only need, this is a real quick scene. We only need 3 walls. It's very quick. Nah, it's sometimes, but mostly you want to, I find that in the end becomes counterproductive because in the end they really, they may change their mind on the day.
They wind up wanting to spin the camera around, and then you have a problem.
Right. Now, where that does play into, if you don't, is the pie wedge.
What's that? What's the pie wedge?
The pie wedge is like, let's say you're doing a huge dress. It's a burned building.
Yeah.
And you have to dress out the ruins of a burned building. And, you don't have unlimited time and money. And so you really have to work with the director and say, hey, so here's the triangle, the pie wedge that you're shooting out from. Here's your big piece. And we're going to dress that, and that's going to be the thing with scale, or the plane crash, or the whatever it is. We're going to dress this out so you have a big wide shots, and sometimes they use a crane, or they'll come down, or they'll bring a character in, and then once you get into the dialogue of the scene itself, then you have angles that you can shoot back into or cheat back into, so you can shoot the rest of the scene and insinuate that there's a 360 degrees,
So it's a lot of it's trickery and visual fakery, yeah.
Yeah, and then also like as I said, obviously this varies on the scale of the project, how much money you have. We've done post tornado trailer park, for instance. The huge amount of material you have to build to have that, the wreckage of that. So you create a big pie wedge of destroyed trailers, including bringing in actual trailers that you break apart, and cars flipped over, and telephone poles that are with ruined lines hanging from them. And you do all that, and then you have areas where you go walk through with the director and says, and then you can shoot all of this. You've got this. You can shoot over here, but you can't look back there to address that, obviously. And they know that. The directors and the DPs know that. And you give them plenty to do for what they need.
On a show like Criminal Minds, do you do tricks like turntable tricks where you put them in an elevator and turn the turntable and they walk out another floor?
I wish we'd done that. Like, what is it? Good Night and Good Luck? Was that the George Clooney film?
Yes.
Thank You and Good. The
Long
Moreau film.
Long time ago, I spent a number of months working on One from the Heart, Francis Ford Coppola movie.
Oh, yeah,
and
great.
Everything, the whole exterior of downtown Las Vegas was built, and city streets were all built inside of sound stages. And one of the tricks they did was that turntable trick, which was they built 2 different hallways, and they put the elevator on a turntable, and they walked in with the camera, and they closed the doors, and they turned the turntable, and they walked into a different hallway. I thought that was really.
I didn't know that was used on that film first.
It might
Edward R. Murrow film.
It might no. It was. I think that trick was used long before even Coppola used it. It's been around a long time.
It's a brilliant trick. I always love that.
Because it's very simple. I mean, it's very simple. But yet you completely fool the audience with it, which is a lot of what you do is to set things up to make them very real, but it's not real at all.
No, and some of them get very complicated. Like, you talk about trying to marry. Sometimes you got to marry all these disparate pieces to try and get a sequence. We had a finale sequence, so this was the setup: big old bank robbery hostage situation, right?
Right.
So you've got an interior of a big bank, and robbers come in and they hold everyone hostage. Then you have a bank explosion where all the windows on a street, all the windows on the bank get blown out, major explosion. Then the scene moved back inside to post-explosion interior bank.
Yeah.
And the bank has been destroyed.
Right.
And okay, how are you going to do that? Well, in our case, what we did was, after thinking about it, our best bet was Universal Back Lot, New York City Street.
Yeah, sure.
And there was a big building on a corner with columns and high windows. Looked like an old bank.
I should ask you which version of their street, because it's burned down 3 times?
This is that's a good question.
And you don't need to know the answer.
This was the rebuilt. This was the rebuilt backlot. This was
Spielberg's rebuild. This was Spielberg oversaw it.
I think so. And this was about 8 years ago, 9 years ago.
That's right, about 8 or 9 years ago.
Right. So refurbished. So we picked an exterior building. Then I designed a set with matching windows, a corner set. We found a good drop that we could cheat with blinds. And we built a big bank interior on set.
Right.
And then we had all of this big standoff with cops and fire department on the back lot, because you couldn't do this in downtown LA Street. You couldn't shut down 2 major intersections while you brought in all the vehicles and did an explosion. Unless
you're Michael Mann.
And not even that anymore.
Okay.
You just can't do it anymore.
Right.
I mean, downtown LA is not the forgotten, city that it once was. It's full of vibrant businesses and people now. You can't. Those days are gone.
Right.
So anyway, so then we did this big explosion on location, and meanwhile, what we were doing is we shot our bank set on stage, went to Universal to do all the exteriors and the big explosion. Meanwhile, we completely redid the interior of the, basically destroyed our set and made a blown up interior out of our set, and then we came back and we shot that, and it was pretty seamless. The whole sequence worked very well.
So let me make sure I understand. Did you build 2 separate interiors, or did you just redress
No, it was one interior. We shot it. The company went off for 2 days to shoot at Universal.
Got it.
And we did a major redress of the interior of the existing set as a destroyed set. The only thing we brought back, we actually brought the blinds that were part of the actual explosion on location, and we dressed them in because they were blown apart and burned. And that was the one thing we brought back from location and put on our set. And then did post-explosion bank interior on stage.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So you've obviously worked with plenty of different people over time, producers and directors over the years. What is it that you, over the years, have learned that you really need most from producers or directors or both that helps you more than anything else? What are the things that you would like to see regularly?
Well, the best thing you can have is, and for all these, is flow of information and decision making. I mean, that's what you really look to. You look for competent guidance about how the process is going to set up. A good producer is, they want it to look great, and they also know how to make it happen. So you want to work with people that know how to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't want to, the director has to have time for he or she to think about what they want. But at some point, the most important thing is that, everyone gets on the same page, and then you move ahead.
So, okay, I do not want you to name names, but I'm just curious, has that ever happened where there was somebody came on, or more than one person that came on, that was not on the same page? And what did you do to get on the same page with them?
Well, there's a lot of, you have to try and, if you have someone who isn't sure about what they want, or let's say they have something in their mind, but it's very, but they can't articulate it very clearly, then it's your job to keep trying to tease it out,
Mm-hmm.
and try and reflect back to the director what you think they're asking for, until until you finally can come to an agreement.
I do imagine that Criminal Minds is a very well-oiled machine, but it surely must, because of the nature of what you do, it surely must have its glitches here and there that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
And so it's
you
just
get glitches where you get hung up on things.
What do you mean by hung up? Somebody gets decides one thing, but you can't do it or something?
Oh yeah, you'll have something with Well, it depends on what. As I said, if we're still talking about the TV shows, they're somewhat circumscribed by the circumstances that they have to make decisions and has to move forward. But you'll have people that change their mind a bunch of times. I'll tell you. I'll give you an example. I've worked with a lot of times. You'll have actors who are first-time directors on TV shows that they work on. First-time directors. In that case, you often have to guide them. They may have very good ideas, but they haven't done it before, and so you might have to guide them, or they're not quite sure where all the by any first-time director, like where the emphasis and of things to worry about should be. They've spent an inordinate amount of time worrying about something that's going to be a very small part of the story in the end. So I've watched certain directors who, as they've done several episodes, you can watch them mature and begin to understand. Well, that I don't care about. That's not that important. I'm sure. Go ahead and let's just do this. That'll be great. But here's what I really care about. This is the part that matters to me.
Right.
This is what's gonna really make this story work or not work. Now you hear stories. I haven't worked on a lot of these shows, but you'll hear stories about shows where someone has a great deal of power, whether it's a showrunner or something else, and they just can't make a decision, or they feel that they can continue to change their minds up to the last minute, and which creates a lot of chaos.
That sounds like a nightmare to me.
Shows don't come out of that.
That sounds nightmarish.
Yeah, lots of them.
Have any of the stars of Criminal Minds wound up directing episodes?
A lot of them.
And
Matthew Gubler was actually came out of that was his focus. He wanted to be a director. That's how he got pulled into acting. And so he's directed, I think, 11 or 12 episodes.
Right.
But also Joe Mantegna, who's is a very, I can't say enough nice things about him.
A gifted writer as well.
Yes.
I mean, Joe Mantegna's written lots of great
director,
stuff.
Theater actor.
Sure.
Different directors come from things at different points. Like Joe is focused on story and acting. He's focused on the actors in the story, and he trusts. He trusts everyone else to do their job. So you present him with the choices. He weighs in on the choices. He has opinions, but he's basically saying, you do your job, and I'll do my job. Other people will be extremely focused on the design. Other directors. Well, I really didn't think there'd be. I wasn't thinking blue. I really felt like this would be green. I imagined it this way, and they have very specific ideas. So it's different people have different focus. Obviously, we talked about Wes Anderson. I mean, a profound designer.
Yes. Very detailed.
Yeah, a profound attention to detail with a profound vision. And I'm not saying that his production designers aren't terrific, but they're clearly a guiding light there from film to film. Just the way Hitchcock, would. Obviously, people put together teams, and the teams establish those looks, but certain directors just have.
Well, Hitchcock was beyond unique in the sense that he not only was a designer to start, he was a designer before he was a director, and he also was at an era and time when he basically invented huge amounts of what we do today. And so I think of him as the greatest. Let me put it this way. I think he's the most influential director we've ever had because of all of the things that he figured out that nobody else had ever done before. A lot of camera tricks. I was wondering about the actors only from this perspective. My assumption would be is because they're on the show for so long and know their characters so well and know the show so well that you probably have less breaking in period when they're doing it for the first time.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. I mean, they know the world. So they're familiar with the world. They're not just being dropped. But, of course, being familiar with the world and directing an episode are different.
Are different, sure. Sure they are.
Yeah, I mean, but they have a great step up. And, of course, they have you have a very supportive team behind you.
All right, so
it's a great way to direct your first project if you're part of a a family who's going to support you.
Oh,
you know?
I would think that that's really, really helpful for a first-time director to be already very familiar with everyone, and they know you and you know them.
Yeah, and no one's, everyone is invested in your success.
Sure.
Which is huge, you know.
Sure. I think that's,
Because,
that's great.
You know,
So,
episodic television directing, or even at the highest level, like it is with streaming shows now, you're still the guest, you know. You're brought in, and you're not part of the ongoing team,
mm-hmm.
and you can get a lot of support and you can get a lot of accolades, or you can be blamed, for if the result is a disappointment for any reason.
So what is it that you most love about? I'm going to ask you the flip side of this in a second. What is it you most love about designing on a TV series? What is the best thing about it?
Well, I think that for one thing, for at least in the show I'm on, there's a couple of things I loved. I love the scouting. I don't know any other job that gives you entree to so many different worlds. Not only do you get to see dams and power plants and go down into the sewer, and you get to go into government facilities, and you get to FBI building, you have entree to all of that. You also have entree to people's homes that you would maybe have no interaction with socially. People from different stratas, the extremely rich, or people from different ethnic backgrounds. That would I be visiting an Iranian plastic surgeon's home in West Hills necessarily? Maybe, but no, But you go into someone's house; it's a whole world. And then, even more so, the poorest people, the people, struggling working class people that I would have no business going in their house, and they might be very suspicious of me if I were, But they're criminal minds, please, they want you to shoot at their house. Please come on in, and you want to see the bedroom, the kitchen, sure, it's a mess, but come on in, and you just get, the entree into the whole world. Like it's been very privileged to see every corner of LA County in shooting this show. For instance. So that's one thing I really like. The other thing that I really like is the challenge. It's just like you're presented with these sets of problems, and they have to be solved. There's no debate about well, maybe this, maybe. I mean, there is some of that, but something has to be done. Decisions have to be made. You have to design, build, paint, dress sets, and they have to be ready. And then there's this very satisfying thing that it's like a launch pad. You make your decisions, and it's off to the races.
Sure,
you're building it.
Yeah.
So as opposed to the speed is satisfying.
You like the action.
You got to get used to having all your stuff thrown away in the trash. That takes some getting used to. You build these beautiful sets.
Have you saved anything?
It's hard to save stuff. You have this fantasy, you save maybe little bits and pieces. You save a really cool door or a window or some handmade thing. But, unless you own gigantic warehouses, and what are you going to do with it all?
Right.
Unless you have a theater company or a film company,
Is there anything, the flip side, as I said I was going to ask, is there anything about production that you just wish you didn't have to do?
Sometimes you'll have long meetings. That can be, a little tiresome, but not usually. Every once in a while, I can't think of anything at this moment, but, every once in a while there's a somewhat intractable problem where you're running into stuff, Usually the frustrating stuff for us at this point is, you're not allowed to do as much stuff outside of the studio space as you used to do.
Mm-hmm.
Things have become much more precious. It's harder to shoot on streets. It's harder to shoot in parks. I mean, in terms of what they'll let you do, even in the film, there's just a lot more restrictions. I mean, people are just a lot more careful. There's a lot more of the Wild West back.
Well, I think, unfortunately, there have been any number of productions over time for the last 100 years that have done damage from a public relations perspective,
fatal damage.
And so people just know, don't let a motion picture crew in here. They're going to destroy your property, and so they don't. They just say forget it. and that has hurt the
and it's
industry.
also, I mean, there's just a lot less you can do, but we still do it. I mean, we find a way to do it. That's all.
So you
Find
have
another way.
you've talked a lot about the speed of it and how much you have to do under pressure. It's clearly a pressure-packed business. What do you do to handle pressure?
You want to get sleep, I would say. Don't want to be sleep deprived. The basic physical stuff. If you're really getting stressed, the things that everybody does. Get some exercise. Try and distract yourself if you're really getting hammered. It is. The film business is a kind of an adrenaline-driven gig. So
Definitely.
you kind of have to be that kind of person, otherwise you wouldn't do it.
Right.
I'm not scared of the stuff I do, but what scares me is what the stuff I don't do. Like I have production design friends who just do those live award shows.
Oh, that's
and
gotta
I
be
just
tough.
can't, I'm like, okay, I can imagine doing a stage show, or even a big Broadway show if I had the right team, because you get to rehearse and practice, and you have dress rehearsals and previews. And no, you're doing some gigantic thing with all these moving parts, big moving parts with stars underneath them, well-known actors climbing around, and it all has to work for that one event that's live on television, live broadcasting, streaming. I mean, I know they all do it. They have teams and they know how to do it, but I would be terrified.
I would also imagine at this point, 325 episodes over 15 years, there's probably not a whole lot that throws you.
No. And I'll start a new job, and it'll be different, and there'll be a lot more challenges and more pressure, and I'll have to feel more pressure that every single thing is being watched, and I have to perform, and I'll have to get back into that. So.
Well, that's do you know where you're going next?
No.
No.
No, I don't.
Are you going to take a break?
Yeah, this is I like to take a break. I've got a lot of other stuff going in my life, actually. I've got other projects. One, I won't go into all of it, but I've got a big property that I've been fixing up that it came into my life 3 years ago. Huge project that I've been working on, and I'd like to do that. And I've got other things. I'm going to be getting married next year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. But the thing about these freelance jobs are you don't want to, I feel a little bit like Rip Van Winkle. I've been on one show for 15 years. So
Sure.
I feel like it's important to get out there, So
Well,
we'll see.
I
Depends on what
can't.
opportunity.
I can't imagine that you won't be snapped up somewhere because you have so much experience.
I think so. I hope so.
I'd be willing to bet on it.
The show, the entire business has shifted so much in the 15 years I've been on this show. It's an entirely different, business. Production has expanded all over the United States and the world.
Yeah.
I'm as likely to get a job in Cincinnati or you're in Pittsburgh, right?
Yes, I'm in Pittsburgh.
I could be in Pittsburgh. I could be in Cincinnati. I could be in Louisiana. I could be in New Mexico, Atlanta, for sure.
There's lots of production that happens here in Pittsburgh. David Fincher wrapped 2 years of Mindhunter here just not too long ago.
I know the team that worked on that.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of opportunity out there, but at the end of the day, I think you'll agree. People still will have cameras on sets, and that will require designers.
Yes. Although, also we know that, set extensions and process shots have gotten so much a part of the world.
True.
I think actors will always want to be in their costumes, in their characters, in their sets.
I agree.
They don't want to sit in a green void.
I agree.
And perform,
Yeah, I would think that's very challenging for them.
There's always going to be sets. But a lot of it, of course, now is, how do your sets, where's the transition between your physical set and the process shot?
Right, of course.
And who's designing it?
and who's designing it. It's still going to require somebody to say, hey, want to put this building here even in this fake image that doesn't exist,
Right.
as opposed to, no, I don't want that building there. I want a statue there. So
Exactly.
somebody has to make those decisions. That is for sure. Well, Vincent, we've been talking for an hour, if you can believe that. And so last couple of questions for you. You've met and dealt with tons of people in the business, and I'm just wondering if you can relate to us an oddball or quirky or offbeat or weird or just plain funny experience that you've had.
Okay, well, I would, for quirky and just mind-boggling stress, there was nothing like designing the Red Knight costume for Terry Gilliam.
Can't wait to hear this.
And for the Fisher King film, for which we were hired very late in the process. The design was supposed to be a costume design, basically a knight on horseback, and then it got Terry Gillianized as the show progressed. And 6 weeks out from shooting, they decided they needed a special effects costume, which at that point involved a guy on horseback wearing a helmet with a flamethrower in it, which we had to design. So the guy this was a physical, stunt person riding on a Percheron stallion with carrying the compressed oxygen, and also CO2 because Terry Gilliam wanted the horse to snort like a locomotive. And this was, they weren't going to do CG because he had been burned on Munchausen and he didn't get a lot of things that were promised. So he wanted in-camera effects. So we designed and built. The top of the helmet was cast aluminum with a flamethrower in it. And the guy drove around. He was riding a horse in Central Park with a 12-inch pilot light coming off his head. And then when he hit a button, 6 feet of flame came out. And we were trying to figure out how we were going to do this without incinerating the horse's head. So we ended up designing a helmet for the horse's head that was made out of Kevlar.
Oh, wow.
With these baffles. And the design of the horse's helmet was designed to baffle away the flames in case the stunt rider accidentally put his head down and hit the button by accident.
Oh.
It was so insane. And we, by the way, the ASPCA was involved. So, but anyway, we had just a quick story of many stories out of that. We were under the gun. So we had to go fly to New York, and we were also making all the props because we had these halberds and swords, and the swords looked like a sawfish, but the blades had teeth on them like a sawfish. And we had to make them out of rubber, and we also had to make them out of aluminum because he had to be able to hack at things, and it wouldn't break. We also had to make breakaway versions, or at least non-lethal versions, and we had halberds and all this stuff. And Keith and I hadn't slept for 60 hours.
Oh.
I mean, we hadn't taken our clothes off. Let me put it that way. We hadn't taken clothes off for 60 hours. We'd fallen asleep on the couches and stuff. And then we had to load all of the costumes for the horse and for the guy and go to New York. And we'd gotten all these used roadie cases from a supplier for rock and roll, supplier. And so everything went into those, and we ran shotgun, and we flew. We slept on the plane, and we ride. And right away from the airport, it was like, okay, we're having a costume fitting, and we're going to do a prop. We need to do a prop walkthrough. We want to do a prop show and tell for the director and the producers. It was okay. So we're waiting. We go to this warehouse in New York, and we go there, and all the actors are there, Jeff Bridges, and everybody's there getting their costumes done. So we're dead, and we got all these props, and we're waiting because obviously they have to take care of the actors first, and so we're waiting and waiting and waiting. Eventually, Keith and I just fell asleep on the floor of this warehouse, and people were stepping over us. Apparently, we're clutching these things. And what I remember is, I was lying on my back, and I look up, and I wake up, and there's Terry Gilliam's face, and he's there, and he's kind of shaking my shoulder. And he's looking down at me with his big smile and says, "You boys look pretty shitty." And he says, "It looks like the rot has settled in. That's good."
That's good. Well,
So then he woke us up, and we staggered. We got up and we showed him all the stuff. And he said, "Oh, that's great. That's great." And anyway, I could tell you a lot of stories about that show. You could do another hour on that show.
I
It was
imagine.
insane. I'll say one thing: it will never happen again. You will never have a man on a real horse with compressed gas and all that stuff, and lycopodium pots leaking red smoke, and the guy trying to, ride this horse down, Amsterdam and Fifth Avenue, in the middle of the night.
No.
It was crazy.
Now it'll all be CG. There will never that.
It was completely CG. And the guy, and rearing the horse on a rock with all this crap, and then blowing the flamethrower off the top of it.
Oh.
You know?
Well, you got to work with one of the Monty Python crew in that way. And that's a very, very memorable experience. That's a hilarious story. And maybe one of these days we'll have you back on and we'll just do an hour on the Fisher King.
You know what? You would not be bored.
I believe you.
It was a remarkable journey, that movie.
I believe you. It sounds like it would
just
be
for two greenhorns.
Yeah,
who
sure.
got pulled in out of the
out of the ether, basically.
Yeah.
All right. So
Well, this has been fun.
do you have a solid piece of of advice or a tip for those who are just starting out or trying to get in, or maybe trying to go to the next level?
Here's the thing. In this particularly, to be an art director, in particular, the passion for film, obviously, so you assume a passion for film and an interest in the history of it, and that you want to be part of that, run off and join the circus kind of thing.
Right.
But there's absolutely getting your hands into it is how it is. There's no, you can go to a good film school, and it's a great way to get a start. A film design program is great. Architecture is another way that people come in. I came in sideways through sculpture and, interest in film and background. There are different venues, but at some point it's really doing it. It's just doing it. Get your hands into it. Mm-hmm. Do theater, do short films, do webisodes. That is how it happens. It's the people you meet as you're making stuff who move up as a group and spread out, and then you get that call from someone you did with a little tiny project 6 months or 2 years ago, and they're doing something and they remember you, and that's how you get the practical end of the experience. And there's simply no
substitute.
There's no way to replace that. It has to be hands-on.
You're talking about
so
two.
I'd say dive in would be my advice.
You're talking about two truly valuable pieces of advice there. In one is you need to just do it, because there is no substitute for just the act of doing it. And then the second, and maybe just as important, if not more important, is the establishment of relationships with people who will be doing other things that may bring you along.
Exactly.
I think that's spectacularly valuable advice. Vincent, this has been a terrific show, and I really appreciate you coming on. You've given us such insight into how your world works that I think most people you would find mysterious. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Well, that's been great. What a pleasure. Thank you.
And so we've come to the end of today's Story Beat. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great episodes to you. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.